So today we're going to talk a little bit about a moment in gaming history that could have completely changed the current landscape of the video game space. And that has to do with the buildup and eventual release of the Xbox. But before the release of that system, we had Microsoft attempt to buy Nintendo. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the SpawnWave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first, we have to go over here. This is actually a pretty cool thing that Microsoft set up. It's at museum.xbox.com. You can go to it in your browser, and it basically starts from the inception of the original Xbox up till now with the Xbox Series, and it is their virtual museum. It's kind of cool. You can just sort of run through. You can log in with your Xbox account, and it'll show your history, your achievements, all these things, the games you played the most. It's kind of cool. So we run through here, right? And this is the start. And we can see the prototype for the Xbox, or the direct Xbox, I guess, then. The meaning of green, Xbox being approved and funded. But first, Microsoft tries to acquire Nintendo. In fact, this is the document that they sent to Nintendo to kind of set things up, because Microsoft did actually meet with Nintendo at the time. And it's kind of funny to think about that, considering Microsoft was going to be brand new to the console space, really just creating their own system. And they were going to be going up against Nintendo, who had been in that space for quite a while, and Sony, who was new but very successful right out of the gate. Now, the document in question that they show, it has that like green text over it. Microsoft tries to acquire Nintendo. So unfortunately, it does cover up a good part of that document, but some stuff we can make out goes over them discussing a possible strategic partnership between Nintendo and Microsoft on future video game platforms, even saying they understand concerns about the possible partnership. And we'll try to, something, it says obscured, the guidelines that he has requested. So yeah, they really did meet with Nintendo. I don't know if they really came close to it, because it was outlined later on with the pitch that Microsoft made, where apparently they just laughed at him for an hour. They say, imagine an hour of somebody just laughing at you. That's kind of how the meeting went. But they did meet again, and this is a bit more interesting, because it's not necessarily Microsoft buying Nintendo, because yeah, they did try to acquire Nintendo. They looked into the current video game space. They saw Nintendo with their home console struggling against Sony. All right, the 64, while it was a pretty cool system because of some of the things it was able to do, it was certainly behind the direction Sony was going in, especially with the PlayStation 2, and that was being revealed, and it was to the point where people thought it was powerful enough to run missile defense systems. That was a big rumor that was going around, to where the actual government had to come out and say, no, that's not actually a thing. But it was still believed to be. It was such a weird rumor that was going around at the time. But we can see them meeting again. A later pitch the year after that letter was for Xbox to simply focus on Nintendo's hardware, while Nintendo itself focused on games. And Nintendo returned to the table for talks. They say, we actually had Nintendo in our building in January 2000 to work through the details of a joint venture where we gave them all the technical specs of the Xbox. The pitch was their hardware stunk, and compared to Sony PlayStation, it did. So the idea was, listen, you're much better at the game portions of it with Mario and all that stuff. Why don't you just let us take care of the hardware? And to a degree, they're not wrong about that, because the original Xbox came out. It was the most powerful system at the time. I mean, it was basically off-the-shelf computer components that they built into this, this box. But it was still able to do a lot of things. Like, you look towards Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, and it was able to do full bump mapping. You look at Halo, and that looked really impressive. And it was a launch title on the Xbox. We get Halo 2, and basically just games that would come out ran and looked better on the original Xbox. And obviously, it had support for full DVD, and it had a more, I guess, mature look to it. That was a big thing that there were concerns around the GameCube that we've seen recently in that very interesting story from VGC, where they brought together a bunch of developers and people who had worked on that hardware, that it would be seen as more for a younger demographic when they were releasing it in the color purple. And then they tried to get it released in a black variant as well, because they saw what Sony and Microsoft were doing with their platforms, working towards a more mature audience. And Sony obviously caught fire with the PS2, but Microsoft showed up with their first system and did outsell Nintendo in the home console space the Xbox sold more than the GameCube. That's just kind of the way it worked out. But Nintendo obviously was very confident because their handheld side was doing phenomenal. I mean, Pokemon was at an all-time high then, and the Game Boy was just rolling along, basically nothing aside from them when it came to a competitor. So I'm sure Nintendo felt pretty comfortable, even though they were having a hard time in the home console market. And obviously the GameCube was their last real push towards, I guess, the more traditional type of console, because then we had the Wii, which worked out for them, the Wii U, which didn't, and now the Switch, which has worked out for them. But what would gaming have looked like if maybe Microsoft didn't buy Nintendo outright, but they worked together with them where they provided the hardware and Nintendo created the games? It really does make you wonder about how that generation could have shaped up if we had an Xbox that maybe it wasn't called the Xbox. It was still called something Nintendo came up with, right? Maybe not the GameCube, because it probably would have looked like the Xbox, but it had the power and it had the games. It didn't have the limitations of the GameCube with the mini DVD drive or even the image itself of that system being more for a younger demographic. What would have happened? I mean, I feel like the PS2 still would have outsold it, but I think they probably would have done much better than either the original Xbox or the GameCube, maybe even combined. And then who knows where their partnerships would have led them up to now in 2021. Something just kind of think back on. But let me know what you guys think about this, especially the museum that they have opened, the virtual museum. What else have you found in there? And what do you think about Nintendo and Microsoft and what they could have done through the past couple of generations with a partnership? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.